gives me great joy to be talking with you today, looking at a choral festival, which the particular college or university that I taught and teach in has entered into for some time, and the dilemmas of singing a requiem, the Berlioz's Requiem, Grand Messe des Morts, in a post-secular world. So where does sacred music sit? What are the continuities and discontinuities in it? So I will start with the nature of a post-secular world, outline the research project, look at Christianity and the evolution of higher education in the UK, music, spirituality and well-being, and finally a musical chain of memory. So a post-secular world, the characteristics which Charles Taylor looks at, we have a world in which there's a peaceful coexistence of sacred and secular worldviews, much more so than when in the late 20th century, secularism was regarded as much more highly. And I'm talking about the UK, and I think I need to say that I'm speaking from that context, although I think some of the things I say will be relevant to the rest of the world, particularly the US. And the religious is now regarded not simply as a remnant of an older world order. This has been caused by a number of migratory communities coming in with different worldviews, particularly Islam and Hinduism and Sikhism. And then there's a huge growth of deinstitutionalized religious groups of one kind or another, both fundamentalist and more liberal. But what is interesting in this climate is that although regular attendance in Christian churches is declining, there is an increased interest in sacred music. And according to a survey in 2012, there have been a huge increase in the downloads of classical sacred music, and also in attendance at cathedral services involving professional choirs. Rowan Williams looks at how the relationship of people to religion in the UK. We've got two groups of people he describes: patrons visiting but not committed, and subscribers who are committed to the religious community. For the religious subscriber, the narrative is accompanied by a collection of dogma and creedal statements, which is not true of the patrons. And those are the people who are most likely to go to those cathedral services. Secularism is seen to have failed. And there is a huge growth in interest in the area of spirituality, whatever that may mean, associated with religion or not associated with religion. And there's now much more of a dialogue between differing worldviews, and that singing these pieces gives an insight into a Christian worldview in a world of diverse worldviews and frames of reference. And so if we in music create a new world and look at an old world and come to terms with it. So one of the paradoxes in post-secularism is the loss of a sense of mystery, and the dualism of either or thinking we're realizing is given a fragmented world. So there is a growth of interest in mystery, often associated with spirituality. So the notion that we can move from an either or attitude to a both and attitude often characterizes the search for a spirituality. And there's no doubt that there has been a missing of God in secularism. And here we see this lovely "Miss him when a choked voice, the crematorium recites the poem about fearing no more the heat of the sun. Miss him when we stumble on the breast lump for the first time, and an involuntary prayer escapes our lips when a shadow crosses our bodies on an X-ray screen, when we receive a transfusion of foaming blood sacrificed anonymously to save life." The notion, and this is what Nietzsche said, that God is dead, but we shall miss him. And so we see an upsurge in looking at a cosmic dimension in a different way. And this overlap between religion and spirituality we shall look at. So the strands that I've identified in the current search are the metaphysical one, the search for a beyond, The intrapersonal one, a search for personal transformation. Interpersonal one, a search for better relationships between people. An intergaian one, concerned with the environment and the natural world. An extrapersonal one concerned with ethical issues, particularly across cultures. A narrative one, where we're looking at religious stories of various kinds, and some of them may be important to us culturally, if not personally. And tradition, using the practices of the great faiths, mindfulness being a classic one, which is obviously related to Buddhism, as transcendental meditation was to Hinduism. So movement one, the Cathedrals Group Choirs Festival in 2018, which was the research project, a musical chain of memory. It was established to bring the group of Cathedrals group of universities together. It involved choirs, chaplains and vice chancellors over a 3 days and a weekend. In the center was a concert, often in a cathedral setting, featuring choirs from a number of the universities. And the concert opened with pieces chosen by individual universities, and then one shared piece. So how does it embody the fundamental principles of the Cathedrals group, all of which had a Christian foundation of some kind or other? There you see some of the names of them, mostly Church of England, but some of them Roman Catholic. We used a grounded theory methodology using the Atlas TI program to analyze and so on. We interviewed students in the choirs, the music leaders of the choirs, the chaplains and dean of chapels, vice chancellors, and people who were involved in the start of the festival. And the aims were to examine the impact of the choir membership on the following areas of well-being: the physical, mental, social, spiritual, and musical development and achievement. Drawing on Rowan Williams' Ecology of Wellbeing, in which he saw that we needed to relate both to our bodies and minds and to the environment, the society, and the cosmos. And in this area, it was mostly the body, the society, and the cosmos were concerned. So we have physical well-being. We had questions in that area, concentrating on improvements in breathing, the social experience, looking at friendship, and mental well-being, raising the mood, and the spiritual experience, a spiritual dimension, sometimes associated, sometimes not, with a particular belief system. To understand higher education in the UK, we have to look in its Christian foundations, which was the love of knowledge, the formation of a strong community of learners, and usefulness to society. And that was as true of Oxford and Cambridge, which are our oldest institutions, and then of the foundation of these universities. And the early universities had chapels, regular Christian worship. They had the notion of collegiality, of people belonging, and of serving the public good. They were influenced by the notion of Eudaimonia, well-being, which comes from Aristotle, but was refined by Aquinas to include a measure of the divine. And then added to that were notions of well-being from psychologists such as Maslow, with the peak experiences, Rogers, and person-centeredness, and theologians such as Rowan Williams. So features of well-being we see in all of this: ethics, meaning, autonomy, contemplation, relations with the past, and relations of respect. And we know that music and health are related, and we looked at how student well-being was enhanced, and how community building, not only within the universities, but across the universities, creating a large communal body, because the numbers involved were often 400 to 500 people. The Cathedrals group were founded mostly in the mid-19th century to train teachers for church schools, with compulsory chapel worship, which of course is no longer there. Music would have been an important part of the curriculum, particularly as playing for a hymn would have been an essential part of school life, and reading Western classical notation would have been the center of the curriculum. But now, these small colleges are now acquired university status and much larger size. the expansion of the curriculum has taken place, and the place of the chapel has now diminished in a sense, but has become much more a place for people to sit and be quiet and so on. So where did the chapel sit in secularization? It was no longer the same place, said somebody, as it was before, but it's often a place of peace. So the certainties of the 1980s, when the festival was formed, are now very different, and so on. And all of these colleges have had a huge sense of the dilemma of what does it mean to be an Anglican college in, well, a secular world, but now in a post-secular world. And the use of things like volunteering and virtues and all of those have started to find a place. 28% of the students self-defined as Christian. Faith they saw and understand that faith was still vital in university life, and students were passively benefiting from the religious practices of a few. Most of the students would define themselves as broadly Christian, but very few of them as attending regularly worship. What's left in the chapels are in general musical events, which are performance, carol services, singing religious music, and so on. So how did it relate to spirituality and well-being? Well, in a sense, it related culturally to a chain of memory, even if the people themselves were not in the same religious place as the people who set the festival up. It did present a shared identity, a shared cultural identity, and it did present a huge example of communitas, of communal activity, taking people to another space, which they might not define in a Christian way. And here we have the notion of spirituality, crossing a threshold into another way of being, a way of knowing different from everyday knowing. And that was clear in the accounts of all participants in it. So a form of spirituality here that reinforces identity, but does not demand a commitment to a particular creed or a particular way of seeing it. In a strange way, religious narratives are a cultural artifacts. They're not unlike a statue and so on. And they do give us an insight to a world that was past. And many religious narratives have become part of various identities, some personal, some national. And you can't understand, for example, the road names in the UK, St. Mark's Road or Vicarage Road, without understanding that cultural identity. The notion of atheist spirituality is coming, but still looking now to the arts, not to religion, for consolation and providing of community. So the approaches we can have to these works, and I know this is very relevant to the US, in the world of the church, a devotional approach is appropriate. The world is a manifestation of God. The relative importance of the text is often concentrated on. The creed and dogma is essential, and people are seen to believe that. So a requiem sung in a church is different, and in a service or part of a requiem is devotional, and that's very different from in a performance. So at that cultural link, I remember a friend of mine who was a declared atheist and Marxist, but loved singing How Great Thou Art because it related to his Welsh cultural roots. Another approach is the storying approach, which sees religious narratives as a good story, and that helps them to give colour to the music. So if one is singing a piece about the crucifixion, one can say, sing this with the passion because this was a dreadful thing to do to people, which is very different from saying, sing this with passion because Jesus died for our sins. So what it does is to bring the religious narratives alive in some way and to illuminate a faith position. And it does give people a chance to look at meaning. They may not have the same meaning of the requiem text as Berlioz did, or indeed people singing it in the mid-20th century did. But works like the Great Mahler Symphony gives people a chance to think about dying, which our culture is not good at. So the storying approach gives us access to a sort of make-believe world of some kind or other, an alternative world, an imaginative world. So we can look at three approaches to religious narrative as it's portrayed in music and elsewhere for that matter. Devotional one, which is inappropriate in an educational context now, a storying one, a make-believe one, or a cultural one as a way of understanding our past, and so on. But what the other thing about the festival is that the conducting styles are usually very nurturing. You have a huge variety of people, some of whom can read music and some of whom can't. And you can get rid of this very coarse conducting style, which was often part of the classical tradition in the past. The liminal space becomes a very important one in current higher education. Increased bureaucracy and controlled curricula does not leave much space for it, but extracurricular music, seen as Dionysian, as celebratory, and that relationship to students' well-being can be very important. So the festival brings uplift, inspiration, treasured and significant memories, and so on. See that enjoyment coming through their faces. People saw the uplift, and so on, giving exceptional peak or lifetime experiences. You do get a meeting of all sorts of people, so that you get current students, past students, extraordinary mix, and something bigger than you are. So you get that peak experience there, being taken up into something, some event which is beyond you, a beautiful building in which, as T.S. Eliot says, prayer has been valid. That for me would be an engagement with spirituality. So this notion of a cosmic dimension was very much in the interviews. Also the climate of acceptance. There isn't a better than you, there's none of that there. They're all applauded, and it gives me a sense of, oh, it's okay to do what I do, and so on. So we have a continuity here with a musical chain of memory, a love of knowledge, positive effects on well-being, the creation of a community of learners, a sense of collegiality, a small community in a wider university community, and also a very valuable place for vulnerable students to help with the mental distress by having friendship groups and traveling with people and eating with people and exploring with people and so on. So a chain of memory, the mythos of the foundation in Anglicanism or Catholicism, that chain of memory is still there, even though the meaning of it may be different. And so there are the continuities in the tradition. There is a notion of perfection and virtuosity, but more of a notion of singing with community building. The discontinuities are the decline in the chapel attendance, the variety of faith positions, leaders, the musical leaders not feeling so valued as they were when music was a much more significant part of the tradition, and also the decline in Western classical notated tradition, and people who haven't grasped that being pulled along in the Berlioz Requiem by people who have got it. But the notion of rising and having a religious experience through the music is still there, and a greater variety of styles and many community sharing with community choirs. So there are discontinuities in the lack of a grasp of notated tradition, and there's a debate about whether the shared works or all the works should be religious, and the debate about where religion sits. And so there we have the spiritual experience of music. If only we can get the materials, expression, construction, and values right, we will get that spiritual experience of encounter. And that encounter spiritually means more than intellectual tools. It means the meeting of a dialogue of souls, taking us out of this world, however you want to define that, embracing social, personal, and spiritual, political well-being, promoting well-being in communities and organizations, a mystery. Thank you for your attention. And I hope I've shown you some continuity from the Christian foundation of our higher education institutions into music as a significant way of continuing that tradition. Some discontinuities, but a musical chain of memory. Thank you very much. Thank you.